For most of human history, walking out your front door with nothing on your head was as unthinkable as walking out with nothing on your feet. A bare head wasn't a fashion choice. It was a statement, and usually not a good one. A scrap of shaped felt or woven straw could tell the world whether you were royalty or property, whether you were free or enslaved, whether you were a soldier, a priest, a widow, or a fool. The same object could get you killed in one country and set you free in another. It nearly wiped a species off the face of the earth. It drove an entire profession slowly, literally insane, and almost nobody alive today gives it a second thought. This is the story of the hat, and it is a far stranger story than anyone expects, because the history of what we put on our heads is really the history of who we were trying to tell everyone we are. Start at the very beginning, before cities, before writing, before agriculture. We don't know who made the first hat, and we never will, because the earliest hats were made of fur, leather, grass, and bark, and almost none of it survived. What we do have are clues. The oldest known piece of actual headwear belonged to a man who died high in the Alps, roughly 5,300 years ago, the frozen mummy we now call Otzi the Iceman. When his body melted out of a glacier on the Italian-Austrian border, he was still wearing a cap of bearskin, fur side out, with a leather chin strap to hold it on in the wind. That cap is older than the pyramids. It is older than Stonehenge. And it tells us something important. The very first thing humans wanted from a hat was simple survival. Keep the heat in. Keep the rain, the snow, and the brutal sun out. The head loses warmth fast and burns easily, and a person who could cover it had a real advantage over a person who couldn't. But here is where it gets interesting, because the hat almost immediately stopped being only about survival. As soon as human beings started organizing themselves into societies with kings and priests and ranks, they reached for the most visible part of the body to mark those differences. And nothing is more visible than the top of your head. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wore the nems, that striped cloth headdress you've seen on the golden mask of Tutankhamun. It wasn't there to block the sun. It was there to announce, from across a crowded room, that the person under it was a living god. The crown was born the same way. A circle of metal placed on the head meant power, and everyone for thousands of years simply agreed to believe it. I mean, think about that for a second. We took a band of gold, balanced it on someone's skull, and decided that this made them the rightful ruler of millions. The hat came first. The authority followed. The ancient world was full of hats that carried meaning far beyond warmth. In ancient Greece, travelers and messengers wore the petissos, a wide-brimmed sun hat, so closely associated with the road that the god Hermes, the divine messenger, was almost always shown wearing one. In Rome, there was a soft, close-fitting felt cap called the pileus, and the pileus carried one of the most powerful messages a hat has ever carried. When a Roman slave was granted their freedom, they were given this cap to wear. To put it on was to announce to the world that you were no longer property, that you were a free human being. A hat, in other words, could be the physical symbol of liberty itself. And that idea did not die with Rome. There was another cap, the Phrygian cap, a soft pointed hat that flopped forward at the top, worn in the ancient region that is now Turkey. Centuries later, revolutionaries in France and America seized on that exact shape as the symbol of freedom from tyranny. During the French Revolution, the red Phrygian cap, the so-called Liberty Cap, was worn by the rebels and became an emblem of the whole uprising. You can still find it today on official seals and statues representing liberty. A floppy ancient hat became shorthand for the most powerful political idea in human history. You'd think people would remember where it came from. Almost nobody does. Now move forward into the Middle Ages, and the hat does something fascinating. It becomes a battlefield for status anxiety. As medieval Europe grew wealthier, ordinary people started dressing better, and the nobility absolutely hated it. They could not stand the idea of a common merchant looking as fine as a lord. So they did what the powerful always do. They made it illegal. These were the sumptuary laws, rules that dictated exactly what each class of person was allowed to wear, right down to the hat. Certain fabrics, certain colors, certain shapes were reserved for the upper ranks, and wearing above your station could get you fined or worse. The medieval hat became a uniform you were legally locked into, and the styles themselves grew spectacular. Noble women wore the hennin, that towering cone-shaped headdress, sometimes more than a foot tall, with a veil flowing from the tip, the storybook princess hat. Men wore elaborate draped hoods called chaperons that started as practical headgear and twisted, over generations, into bizarre sculptural shapes worn purely to show off. The hat had become a competition, and the prize was being seen as more important than the person standing next to you. And while all of this status signaling was happening, a quiet technological revolution was taking place that would define hats for the next 500 years. That revolution was felt. Felt is one of the oldest manufactured materials on Earth, made not by weaving but by matting animal fibers together with heat, moisture, and pressure until they lock into a dense, water-resistant fabric that can be shaped into almost anything. And the finest felt in the world, the smoothest, the most waterproof, the most luxurious, came from one animal in particular, the beaver. Beaver underfur has microscopic barbs that grip together better than almost any other fiber, producing a felt so fine and so weatherproof that for centuries a beaver hat was the ultimate status symbol across Europe. Everyone who was anyone wanted one. And that desire, that simple hunger for a better hat, was about to reshape the map of the entire world. Because here is the problem. Europe hunted its own beavers to near extinction. By the 1600s, the European beaver was almost gone, wiped out to feed the demand for hats. So the hat makers looked across the ocean to a continent absolutely teeming with beaver, North America. The beaver fur trade became one of the primary engines driving the European exploration and colonization of Canada and the northern United States. Trappers, traders, and entire companies pushed deep into the wilderness, not chasing gold, not chasing land, but chasing a rodent whose fur made a good hat. The Hudson's Bay Company, founded in 1670 and still operating centuries later, built a commercial empire across the Canadian North on the back of the beaver trade. Whole regions were explored, mapped, fought over, and settled because Europe wanted felt hats. And the beaver paid the price. Just as in Europe, the North American beaver was trapped relentlessly, pushed to the brink of extinction across huge stretches of the continent. A fashion accessory had triggered an ecological catastrophe spanning 2 continents and several hundred years. All for what sat on a gentleman's head. But the beaver hat had a darker secret than the slaughter that produced it, and this is the part that gave us a phrase you still use today. To turn that beautiful fur into felt, hat makers used a process called carroting, and the key ingredient was mercury. A solution of mercury was brushed onto the fur to make the fibers mat together more easily, and as the hatters worked, day after day, year after year, in hot, poorly ventilated workshops, they breathed in mercury vapor. Mercury is a neurotoxin. It accumulates in the body and slowly destroys the nervous system. The hatters developed trembling hands, slurred speech, memory loss, paranoia, hallucinations, and violent mood swings. In the hat-making towns, especially places like Danbury, Connecticut, the condition was so common it had a local name, the Danbury Shakes. The men who made the world's finest hats were being poisoned by the very thing that made them. And no, I'm not making that up. This is where the phrase "mad as a hatter" comes from. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was an occupational disease, a real epidemic of mercury poisoning, hiding inside one of the most respectable trades in the country. The Mad Hatter was a public health crisis long before he was a character in a children's book. And astonishingly, mercury was not banned from American hat making until the 1940s. For generations, we knew what was happening, and we kept doing it anyway, because the hats were beautiful and the money was good. If you're finding the hidden history of everyday objects as wild as I am, take 1 second to subscribe, because the next twist turned the hat from a craft into a global industry. By the 1700s and 1800s, hats had become a precise language that everyone could read. The tricorn, the 3-cornered hat of the 1700s, marked the gentleman and the soldier of the colonial era. Then came the bicorn, the 2-cornered hat worn sideways that became forever associated with one man, Napoleon, whose silhouette is recognizable from the hat alone. And then, in the 1800s, came the king of them all, the top hat. Tall, glossy, absurdly impractical. The top hat became the unmistakable symbol of the respectable 19th century gentleman, of bankers and industrialists and statesmen. There's a legend, almost certainly exaggerated, that when the very first top hat was worn in public in London in 1797, it caused such a commotion that crowds gathered, women fainted, and the wearer was actually charged with disturbing the peace. Whether or not that's true, it captures something real. A new hat could be a genuine sensation, a shock to the entire social order. And then a single hat appeared that quietly told a much bigger story about the whole century. In 1849, an English nobleman named Edward Coke walked into the famous London hat shop Lock & Company with a very specific problem. His gamekeepers, the men who managed his estate, rode on horseback through the woods, and their tall top hats kept getting knocked off and ruined by low-hanging branches. He wanted something hard, low, and tough that would survive the job. Locke and Company passed the order to two hat makers, Thomas and William Bowler, and the brothers produced a round, hard, close-fitting felt hat. The story goes that when Coke came to collect it, he placed the hat on the floor and stamped on it, hard, twice, to test whether it would hold. It did. He paid 12 shillings and walked out with the first bowler hat. Now here is why that matters. The bowler was invented as cheap, tough, practical headgear for working men, for laborers, gamekeepers, and railway workers. And then it climbed the social ladder. Within a few generations, that same humble bowler had become the absolute uniform of the City of London banker and businessman, the very symbol of buttoned-up respectability. A hat designed to be stamped on by a country squire ended up on the heads of the most powerful financiers in Europe. And the bowler exposes one of the great myths in all of hat history, a myth that Hollywood sold you. Picture the American Old West, the cowboy, the gunslinger, the frontier. What's on his head? A tall, wide-brimmed Stetson, right? Here's the truth. The hat that actually won the West was the bowler. The practical, hard, dome-shaped bowler, the same hat the bankers wore, was the most common headgear among cowboys, railroad men, and outlaws on the real American frontier, precisely because it wouldn't blow off in the wind and could take a beating. The iconic cowboy hat, the Stetson, was real, invented by John Stetson in 1865 and called the Boss of the Plains. But it was nowhere near as universal as the movies pretend. The image you carry in your head of the Wild West is, to a large degree, a costume invented later by film studios. The real cowboy was far more likely to be wearing the hat of a London accountant. But of all the things a hat has ever done, nothing is stranger than what happened in Turkey, because this is where wearing the wrong hat became a matter of life and death. For most of the Ottoman Empire's later history, the standard headwear was the fez, that short, brimless, red felt cap with a tassel. And it's worth knowing that the fez itself had once been a modernizing reform. Back in 1826, the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II had pushed the fez onto his people to replace the older turban as a symbol of a more unified, forward-looking empire. The fez was progress. Then, almost exactly a century later, everything flipped. After the empire collapsed and the modern Turkish Republic was founded, its leader Mustafa Kemal Ataturk looked at that very same fez and saw the opposite. To him, it was a symbol of backwardness, of religion tangled up in the state, of everything holding his new nation back. So in 1925, he passed one of the most extraordinary laws in the history of clothing, the hat law. It banned the fez outright and required Turkish men to wear Western-style brimmed hats instead. Think about how radical that is. The government made it a crime to wear the wrong hat. People queued outside shops before dawn to buy Western hats they didn't understand, some improvising with cardboard. And when serious resistance broke out, the state crushed it without mercy. During the unrest that followed, dozens of people were executed, including a religious scholar who had written a pamphlet against the new headwear. Men went to the gallows over a hat. The penalty for stubbornly wearing a fez in public could be prison, and in those early years of fury, far worse. The same red cap that one ruler had imposed as a symbol of progress, another ruler banned as a symbol of decay, and people died on both sides of that change. That is how much meaning we pack into the thing on our heads. By the early 20th century, in Europe and America, the hat had reached the peak of its power, ruling daily life so completely that we can barely imagine it now. No respectable person, man or woman, left the house without one. Going bareheaded in public marked you as poor, eccentric, or scandalous, and the hats kept evolving. Women in the roaring 1920s adopted the cloche, a snug bell-shaped hat pulled down low over the eyes, perfectly matched to the short bobbed hairstyles of the flapper era. Men in the early 20th century gradually traded the stiff bowler and top hat for something softer and more casual, the fedora, with its creased crown and flexible brim. And the fedora has a charming origin most people never suspect. It's named after a stage play. In 1882, a French drama called Fedora featured the famous actress Sarah Bernhardt playing a princess who wore a soft, stylish brimmed hat. The hat caught on, took the name of the play, and went on to become one of the defining men's hats of the entire century. A woman's costume in a stage play gave the world the most masculine hat in modern history. Hats spread into every corner of work and life, each one a badge. The hard hat, that dome safety helmet you see on every construction site, was developed around 1919 by a man named Edward Bullard, who adapted ideas from the steel helmets of the First World War to protect workers' heads from falling debris. He called his version the hard-boiled hat. The military helmet, the chef's toque, the nurse's cap, the academic mortarboard tossed in the air at graduation, the police officer's cap. Every one of these is a hat, doing the same ancient job the pharaoh's headdress did, telling you instantly who a person is and what they do before they say a single word. And then, almost overnight in historical terms, the hat fell. After ruling human heads for thousands of years, the everyday hat very nearly vanished in the second half of the 20th century. There's a popular story that one man killed the hat, that when the young American president John F. Kennedy went bareheaded, the fashion collapsed. It's a great story, and it's mostly a myth. He actually did wear a formal hat at his inauguration, and the decline was already well underway before him. The real causes were bigger and quieter. The automobile with its low roof made tall hats awkward and pointless. You couldn't get into a car comfortably while wearing one. After the Second World War, society as a whole grew more casual, more relaxed, less formal. Young people, building their own culture for the first time, rejected the rigid dress codes of their parents, and the hat was right at the center of those old rules. New hairstyles, carefully sprayed and shaped, made hats an enemy of the look people had spent money to achieve. Piece by piece, the reasons to wear a hat fell away, and within a couple of decades, a custom thousands of years old simply stopped being the default. For the first time in recorded history, the normal thing was to leave the house with your head bare. But the hat did not actually die. It transformed, one more time, into something almost nobody in a top hat would have recognized as its heir: the baseball cap. What began as the practical headgear of one American sport, a soft cap with a brim to shade a player's eyes from the sun, broke loose and conquered the world. Today, the baseball cap is very likely the single most worn hat on the planet, found on every continent, across every class, worn by farmers and presidents alike. It carries the same messages hats always have. A logo on the front signals your team, your brand, your tribe, your allegiance, exactly the way a crest or a color once did. The crown announced the king. The pileus announced the freed slave. The bowler announced the banker. And now a curved brim and a stitched logo announce which team you love and which company you trust. The language never disappeared, we just changed the words. So the next time you pull a cap over your head without thinking, or pass a rack of them in a store, stop for 1 second and consider what you're actually holding. A hat fought wars of status across medieval Europe. A hat drove explorers across an ocean and a rodent to the edge of extinction. A hat poisoned generations of craftsmen and gave us a phrase for madness we still use today. A hat freed Roman slaves and crowned Egyptian gods. A hat sent men to the gallows in Turkey for refusing to take it off. From a frozen cap of bearskin on a man who died 5,000 years ago in the Alps, to the baseball cap sitting in your closet right now, this one simple object has been there at every turn, quietly telling the world who we are. We just rarely stop to think about that. If you enjoyed this journey through the hidden history of something hiding in plain sight, hit subscribe and drop a comment with the everyday object you want explored next. And if this video taught you something you'll never unsee, leave a like so more people can find it.